Here we go. So today we're gonna, we just got Barbara joining. Today we're going to I just start off with an announcement. We're spiffing up the website for Aleph Talks. So the resource section
Hi,
of
Barbara.
it is getting
Hi.
the resource tab on the website is getting juiced with a lot more things. So you can take a look at that, and we'll keep having it grow. And let's see, what we're going to do right now is we're going to just go back and revisit mysticism and the eternal feminine. We really didn't do justice to one piece of it, so we'll just touch on that. And since we have plenty of women here, that's the least we can do.
I think I might have been the only one, or maybe Nancy was here when we were doing it. I felt really outnumbered. But the guys were very gentle, and they asked good questions. But they wanted to know, was it maybe just a subjective perception that things were unequal? So I have to say, not in my humble opinion.
I don't know how to get.
That might have been an oversimplification. But
Hold on, let me put this one down. Oh, there's only one there. Now here we go. Okay. So this is what we had spent some time on. And there are a bunch of references here, but the key thing was, and I think Judith, you provided this when God had a wife, was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
move it over.
So let's see, hold on one sec. I'm going to turn it into slideshow mode. Okay. So we went through all of this stuff here, dealing with the fact that it appears what we get for history today has been, shall we say, doctored or rewritten, so that there apparently was a huge influence of women, and on the same level as men in any notion of religion for millennia. And yet what we get today is, oh, there was, this man who was doing this and man was doing that. So the key thing here is this page. We just added this so to make it explicit. In the Torah, there's a discussion of El, and so we have the term Israel. So El is the God there that.
Can you do something about that echo?
Oh, let me mute everybody. Let me go mute. So we don't have the. Okay, great. So the God that was there, El, had a wife, Asherah, and the Hebrew nation worshipped El, they worshipped Asherah, and they worshipped many other entities such as Baal, which was this bull. And this was just taken for granted that Asherah was on the same level as El. Now El, according to what we can find, apparently had not simply Asherah, he had 700 wives total and 300 concubines. So he was busy. And he ended up having many progeny. And so at some point, he decided to bless all the different tribes of man. Apparently they felt 70 was enough. And his sons were each assigned to one of these different tribes all over the earth. And one of them was the Hebrew tribe. And the one there, the Hebrew tribe, was the one that worshiped his son Yahweh. Now, Yahweh is there, but we still have, remember that they're still worshiping El and Asherah and all these other deities. So they're like, so what in the world is going on? Is that there were several factions in the Hebrew tribe. One that had the power that was led by Ephraim, and the second one that was trying to get the power that was led by Judah, which is why we call them Jews. They're of the faction of Judah. And eventually this faction of Judah overtook Ephraim and became the dominant group. Now Moses was told by Yahweh that everyone should only worship Yahweh. And this is very explicit. This is the first commandment of the 10 commandments. And because of this, this means that the Hebrew tribe couldn't worship Baal anymore, but they couldn't worship Asherah and any other deities that they were there. And Asherah we find again and again in carvings all over the place. Asherah was symbolized by a tree, and perhaps this is the tree of knowledge of good and evil that was in Eden, but it's a tree. It's showing growth and nature. And in fact, Asherah was actually worshipped in Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. That wasn't an accident there. But none of this shows up in the Torah in any meaningful way. Asherah was, again, very widely worshipped. They keep finding again and again all kinds of statues and everything else. And there just appears to be some sort of conspiracy where the role of women, especially on the mystic side, has just been downplayed. And it's happened repeatedly in both the Old and the New Testaments. So with that, Judith, do you want me to, is there anything else that jumped at you in this? Oh, wait, she's on mute.
No, I mean, I think it's very good. I just had one question. Being translated to the Greek, when they were talking about Sophia, were they bringing that back to Asherah? Or is Sophia in the Greek, different?
Yeah, I think Sophia, I'm just thinking of Pistis Sophia, and it's simply different than Asherah. Asherah was there long before.
Okay. I was putting them both as maybe the same person, but I was confused on whether it was or wasn't.
Yeah, I don't think they were, but it just points out, we did touch on this with Pistis Sophia as being, associated with Jesus of Nazareth and with the apostles and Mary Magdalene and so forth. But Sophia was not. But Sophia was an entity, but was not like Asherah.
Okay.
I think of Sophia as almost like a principle.
Yeah.
That's and the Sephira, the tree of life. One of the spheres on the Kabbalah side. It's kind of a transpersonal entity.
Yeah, there was this point of confusion of of El being married to Asherah and Yahweh being married to Asherah, which was pointed out in the book. But you know, I don't know how these things work. So anyway, that was all we wanted to cover on this, other than, you know, trying to point out that history has been rewritten here. Now let's go to the other thing we're going to do, which is here. Okay.
Just a quick comment on Sophia. I just briefly looked up Wikipedia, and it looks like it blends the two concepts that we're separating. Just as an idea, people might want to look there too.
Well,
Okay.
do you want to share
Well,
what it says?
what are the two concepts, Ed?
Well, one's that she's a feminine element of God, but she's also a feminine figure, and that she is sometimes associated with Asherah.
Okay.
That there's some kind of combination. It's almost as if she's the feminine soul, but an aspect of God, and then comes into being also as Asherah. I don't know if that makes sense. I just did a very
Okay.
cursory, quick read of the first two paragraphs.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just the book was worth reading in part because there's that's what's interesting to me is in the last 40 years there's been a huge amount of archaeology that's been done, and the archaeology has involved dealing with things like doing DNA sequencing to see what was really going on here, and a lot of analysis with very high-powered scientific tools like spectrometers and whatever else they can lay their hands on. So a lot
They
of
could analyze the blood, you know, of what or who was sacrificed
right.
on the altars.
As an example, we talked about the Eleusinian mysteries and how there was a possibility that they were ingesting something that was psychogenic, and they actually found, due to archaeology, both in Eleusis, but also in Italy and in Spain, very little glasses, goblets that could only hold a couple tablespoons of some liquid, and they did scrapings on these and sequenced the stuff, and it appears to again be some highly potent combination of mushrooms and you know, who knows what else is what was there. So it isn't really speculation. There really was some high-powered stuff going on, and that's all an example of this. The book where God had a wife is picking up on a lot of this new archaeology, and a lot of this was simply suppressed because it wasn't politically you know, popular with the powers that be. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back. We've been dealing with this topic again and again, mysticism in the East and West, and we've left out so many different things, and we're going to go back and just survey what we missed. Do you want to say anything about? We do intend to go include some more astrology, but that's not for today.
Yeah, we're working on it. Can you see this?
Can people see? There it is.
Okay.
This is a solstice chart.
And I'm using an ancient Mac, you know, an archaeologist would have a wonderful time with it. And it's very hard to get that to print. We have to translate things into some other software that'll work on one of our newer PCs. And to get it to come out the other side takes about 10 steps right now. We keep thinking we're about to get a new computer. And then we kind of table it, but I figure out various ways to translate it all. And then we had a whole bunch of stuff printed out. We just couldn't find it. We move from room to room sometimes in the house as things have been worked on. So it's all technical reasons. So we're sorry, but we're working on it and getting there. And I'm excavating some books online that I used to have and don't have anymore. And I'll just say it's very much like the season of the yod for this solstice season, which is a really powerful aspect. So I, just to give out a bit of hope, I think we're ripe for a major turning point. That's what it's indicating, and that's what I certainly hope for as I look out at the world and see what's going on. So we're hoping that we'll be able to get this done properly. I didn't want to just cram it in the unfinished form tonight, so we are working on it.
Okay. So here we go. And these are just some of the things that we're going to touch on here in terms of what we didn't cover yet. And the one that we enjoyed a lot was Walt Whitman, who was very much of a mystic. He was born in Brooklyn, right? And was during the Civil War, was a nurse. He tended to the wounded in various hospitals. But he ended up putting together this wonderful poetry collection of Leaves of Grass, which some of the critics described as obscene because of its overt sexuality. I've read it and I don't believe that, but that's me. Whitman was self-educated. He left school when he was 11 years old and had a whole variety of jobs. And it's hard to believe with this background that he would become the person that he did. And in his early 30s, he began to have experiences that really transformed him. And when he was 36, he published his collection of poems, Leaves of Grass. He kept iterating on it again and again. So there were just different editions of it, different versions of it. And the poetry was so different than anything else that he became the focal point of this revolution in American literature, and was really viewed as someone of the common man in the Western world than anything else. So what he chose to do is he said, I want to celebrate myself, but it becomes clear the self that he celebrates is not the ordinary self that we experience. It's something far beyond that. And here is really what the mystic side of things that sets him apart. There's in the sanest hours a consciousness, a thought that rises independent and lifted out from all else, calm like the stars, shining eternal. This is the thought of identity. Yours for you, whoever you are, is mine for me. Miracle of miracles, beyond statement, most spiritual and vaguest of earth's dreams, yet hardest basic fact, and only entrance to all facts. In such devout hours, in the midst of the significant wonders of heaven and earth, significant only because of the me in the center, creeds, conventions fall away and become of no account before this simple idea. Under the luminousness of real vision, it alone takes possession, takes value. Like the shadowy dwarf in the fable, once liberated and looked upon, it expands over the whole earth and spreads to the roof of heaven. So hard to believe that this is the sort of poetry you would get from someone other than he had these experiences that just transcended everything, and it lifted him, or as he said, it expands over the whole earth and spreads to the roof of heaven. This is what sets Whitman apart from all the other people. What in the world is he talking about here? He's describing his experience with some sort of fourth state of consciousness beyond the states of waking, dreaming, and sleeping, which some Eastern mystics could call transcendental consciousness or the experience of the self. So his mind is settled inward, and he's moving beyond all perceptions, thoughts, and feelings, and experiences consciousness by itself, consciousness knowing itself alone, just pure consciousness, unbounded and fully awake within itself. So we go on here. Only in the perfect uncontamination and solitariness of individuality, only hereafter, let me just check this. Only here and on such terms, the meditation, the devout ecstasy, the soaring flight, only here, communion with the mysteries, the soul emerges, and all statements, church sermons melt away like the vapors, alone in silent thought and awe and aspiration, and then the interior consciousness, like a hitherto unseen inscription in magic ink, beams out of its wondrous lines to the sense. Bibles may convey and priests expound, but it's exclusively for the noiseless operation of one isolated self to enter the pure ether of veneration, reach the divine levels, and commune with the unutterable. So he's talking about the transcendental quality of this experience that he had, the perfect uncontamination and solitariness of the individuality. The mind's awake, but it's unshadowed by thoughts or perceptions. And this is his state of devout ecstasy. What do you think, Bruce? Do you think he made a little burst into enlightenment, or?
Oh yeah, he's talking about realization of some kind, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Realization is a kind of experience that is very different. And it's also, people have various kinds of realization because everyone is actually different about it. So it's a big field.
Yeah, I like his language, how he's trying to capture what probably you cannot capture with words. He's trying to capture it, and it's very striking to me.
Yeah, well, the experience is very striking.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think he's very evocative. And he edited and edited like crazy. So he really was working out the exact language that he was using.
Yeah.
It wasn't casually tossed off at all.
So here's his poem here. O thou transcendent, nameless, the fiber and the breath, light of the light, shedding forth universes, thou center of them, thou mightier center of the true, the good, the loving, thou moral, spiritual fountain, affection's source, thou reservoir. O pensive soul of me, O thirst unsatisfied, waitest not there, waitest not happily for us somewhere, there the comrade perfect, thou pulse, thou motive of the stars, sun systems, that circling move in order, safe, harmonious, athwart the shapeless vastness of space. How should I think, how breathe a single breath? How speak if out of myself I could not launch to those superior universes? So, and this is what I shall do. Love the earth and the sun and the animals, despise riches, give alms to everyone that asks, stand up for people who are called stupid and crazy, devote your income and labor to others, hate tyrants, argue not concerning God, have patience and indulgence toward the people, take off your hat to nothing known or unknown, and to any man or number of men, go freely with powerful, uneducated persons, and with the young, and with the mothers or families. Re-examine all you've been told in school or church, or in any book, and dismiss whatever insults your own soul. And your very flesh shall be a great poem and have the richest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every motion and joint of your body. And so it goes. So Whitman actually was a journalist. It was one of the jobs he had, and a teacher. The thing that I cited was he was this volunteer nurse during the Civil War. He didn't want to go off and kill people, be a soldier.
He was initially called to his brother's side, who had been injured. And he was so appalled by what he saw. You know, it was a lot of like hand-to-hand combat in the Civil War with, you know, people just losing limbs left and right. That he just stayed. He couldn't just turn his back on the men, a lot of whom were dying all alone.
Yeah,
He just had so much compassion for them.
Yeah, it's estimated that as many people died from the wounds or from disease in the Civil War as died in battle. So go figure.
Gangrene was, they didn't have any antibiotics.
No. So The Leaves of Grass was really his attempt at reaching out to the common person with what is now viewed as an American epic. And he continued expanding and revising it until he died, 1892. And toward the end of his life, he moved to Camden, New Jersey, where he actually died. So the poetry lends itself to music, and there's a number of composers that have done this, probably more than any American poet, except for Emily Dickinson and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And the list is very long for composers: Bernstein, Benjamin Britten, Frederick Delius, and on. Here, Ralph Vaughan Williams, Kurt Weill, no less. So you can find these on YouTube. They're very pretty, and the poems are just lend themselves to having music. Now, Whitman said that mysticism is not really a coherent philosophy of life, but more a temper of mind. So a mystic vision is intuitive. That again, you have to remember the word mystic means that words don't do the job for describing what's going on. That's why it's mystical. So intuitive is a way of saying that, but you feel the presence of divine reality behind and within the ordinary world of the sense of perception. Whitman feels that God and the Supreme Soul animating all things are identical, and believes that all things in the visible world are but forms and manifestations of the one divine life, and that these phenomena are changing and temporary, while the soul that informs them is eternal, which is an interesting observation. The human soul, too, is eternal, and transcendentalism is closely connected to mysticism, for it emphasizes that the intuitive and spiritual over the practical. So Whitman wrote, "And I know the hand of God is the promise of my own, and I know that the Spirit of God is the brother of my own, and that all of the creation of love." So as a mystic, Whitman believed there's no difference between creator and the creation. His self is a universal self and he sees people of sexes, ages, different creeds and codes and so forth, different walks of life. Even animals are included in this. And the poet, along with the divine spirit, not only loves them all, but he's part of them, which is, very much consonant with many other religious figures. Jesus of Nazareth said that, when you look for God, look within you. That's where it is.
I would say that's a really good working definition of mysticism, is that it's that experience of oneness, and that's where God is. And God is not outside of creation, making it like a potter making a pot or a clockmaker making a clock, but that it's emanating from that oneness, and that everything is an expression of that, including our consciousness.
And Nina, do you have any comment on this? Are you muted? I didn't check.
I've been thinking a lot about that. And even from my own experience, I feel that finding God inside is not all that easy. There are moments of it, and then when you come back into this reality and you're dealing with the mundane issues, it's the same God that is in everybody else, but it's so covered up that that it's almost, as Whitman says, it's such a solitary process. And in some ways, I at least that was my desire, was to be just free of the mundane, because the sense world doesn't give it to you.
Well, I would say the mystic would say that is exactly where it is.
Yes, but it has to also be.
It's in the tissue boxes, it's everywhere.
Yes, but it isn't. It doesn't feel like it. When you look at the face of human beings, there is so much. There are so many layers of ignorance. And it's easier to find it inside than it is to find it outside in others. Let's put it this way. Because if you're doing the work, it keeps coming. But you find it internally, but doesn't mean you find it externally. It's very difficult to find it in others. You find it in nature, yes, but not in people necessarily. They're few and far between that are really lit. Anyway, that's my experience.
Okay. I always think of the unconditional love you get from dogs.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's nature, right?
Yeah.
But you don't get it from people, because people have agendas. And it depends on how many layers you've worked off on yourself also, how sensitive you are to others. And I find that in all the spiritual circles that I've been a part of, it's been far and few in between, because people talk so much about these things, but the layers are not being removed. And the work is really in removing those layers,
Sure.
So I've stopped looking outward anymore. It's just like, hey, everybody's on a different journey, different point of evolution.
Oh, thank you.
I love this line about Whitman, and I know the hand of God is the promise of my own. I love this line of his. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. The Song of Myself has been regarded as a prolonged expression of an experience that is essentially mystical.
Yes.
Whitman is greatly influenced not only by Emerson, but by Oriental mysticism. But there's a big difference between Whitman's mysticism and the mysticism of the Orient, in that the Oriental mystic believes communication between soul and God is possible only through the mortification or conquest of the senses and physical appetites. And Whitman believes that the spiritual experiences are possible without satisfying the physical appetites. So there's a great deal of sexual elements in Whitman's poetry. That is a case in point here. And the sexual connotations are inseparable from the mystical experience. And Whitman is overjoyed in the revelation of union of his body with his soul that's been depicted as mystical expression.
Excuse me.
I'm just going to move this. So the poet has a feeling of fraternity and oneness with God and his fellow man. And Whitman would say, I know the hand of God is the promise of my own. And I know that the spirit of God is the brother of my own, and that all is the creation of love. So that's it. In this Song of Myself, there's symbolically conveyed through a piece of sensuous experience, truly mystical experience that he goes on and says that the poet becomes the spokesman of forbidden voices of sex and lusts, voices indecent. He loves his body and is insensitive to another's touch. Both the lady and the prostitute enjoy equal positions in his poetry, for the reality, in the reality, the soul's been created by the same God. If anything is sacred, the human is sacred. He says in I Sing the Body Electric. And he celebrates all the organs of the body, male and female. He does not reject the material world. He seeks the spiritual through the material.
Yes.
And he does not subscribe to the belief that objects are elusive. There's no tendency on the part of the soul to leave the world for God. Whitman does not belittle the achievements of science and materialism, and he accepts the reality in saying, hurrah for positive science, long live exact demonstration. But he's praising not merely life, but the absolute worth of every particular and individual person. So his comic consciousness in the,
Cosmic,
I think that's a typo, it should be cosmic consciousness in the result of the expansion of the ego. The I assumes an enlarged and universal connotation, embracing the smallest and the greatest things in the universe as something perfect and of great value. This is sometimes viewed as an inverted mystical experience. The traditional mystic, I think what he's talking about here is the Eastern view. You're attempting to annihilate himself and mortify your senses in preparation for union with the divine. But Whitman magnifies the self and glorifies the senses in his progress toward the union with the absolute. And so he enters a mystical trance by observing a spear of summer grass. This is his leaf of grass. But he seldom lost touch with physical reality, even in the midst of his mystical experience. And physical phenomena for him were symbols of spiritual reality. So he believed the unseen proved by seen, and he makes use of highly sensuous and concrete imagery to convey his perception of divine reality. He finds a purpose behind any natural object, grass, sea, birds, flowers, animals, and so forth. So he's a mystic as much as he is a poet of democracy and science, but a mystic without creed. Whitman's mystical experience of his self comes through various stages. He had the awakening of self, first of all. Then he had the purification of his self. Then he had purification involved with acceptance of the body and all its functions, which reflects his goal to achieve the mystical experience through physical reality. So his brand of mysticism is not identifiable with the selflessness of the Christian variety or the passive side of the Oriental, but mysticism is democratic mysticism. It's available to everyone on equal terms, and he's embracing contradictory elements. So the Song of Myself is perhaps the best illustration of Whitman's mysticism. So I encourage everyone to go read it. And here are the references for it.
I kind of like in terms of my own experience anyway, like when you actually have these kinds of experiences, they're in a much deeper part of your own mind, and that is reality. But the thing is that it's very different. Like when you have understanding of the vastness of heart mind and love mind and all that, it changes everything. You see things entirely a different way altogether. And so, I mean, he's doing a very good job of trying to describe it. But I'm just trying to emphasize that the actual realization experience is dramatically different from ordinary understanding, not just a little bit, but a whole lot. So it's really hard to put that into any language or understanding. Just really different.
I think you can see that from the language he uses. It was so different than the language that most other poets would be using, that there was something just immediately profound that separated this from everything else.
Yeah, but that's just the indication of the kind of realization he had.
Right.
And when you have that kind of realization, you generally don't talk about it because nobody can hear you or understand. So you just never go there. But nonetheless, that's what it's actually like, in my experience.
Right.
I just had a thought listening to this about any potential relation to Kama Sutra. It seems like some celebration of the physical, with attempting more lofty experiences might be related here.
I think that's a good point. One thing, my mother taught Whitman a lot. He was one of her favorite poets, and she considered herself to be a Unitarian mystic. And one thing she would point out from his biography was that he was struggling with being homosexual at that time, in the 1860s in America. And it does come out in some poems, and in others it's kind of sublimated, but that I think kind of informed his attitudes about sexuality and his self, and that he was trying to consciously embrace that. There was no gay identity at that time. There was no such thing. He was trying to forge something that was a uniquely American voice. He didn't want to be mimicking English poets or European poets. And he wanted to be free to celebrate the body as a miracle as much as anything else, and love in all its shapes and forms. So he was really in that sense like a truly democratic. I could say he had a very Aquarian sensibility. He was a precursor in that way, speaking up for the rights of the individual to be defined in their own terms, which was a new concept then. And so it wasn't about negating himself, but I do believe he did transcend it. but it was not about leaving it behind. It was about expanding it.
Right.
That's my take on it.
I think the Kama Sutra is a different thing, though. The Kama Sutra is not about transcendence. It's just about celebration of the sense, the body,
And
And
it's also Hindu.
the acceptance of it. The
Right.
transcendence part comes in the tantric world, where you use that energy and direct it out, or direct it towards Kundalini. Well, I hope I'm using the word right. That's a
Kundalini.
Kundalini.
Yeah.
Kundalini.
right. I don't know how to pronounce it, but
Yeah,
anyway,
But
whatever.
are they really separate? I mean, Kama Sutra and Tantric
I think they are. My sense
well,
is
they're
they are.
two definitions of one practice.
I don't know enough about it, but my sense from what I remember, I mean, God, I remember this work I did when I was in my teens. I remember it as being sensuous, but I haven't had the desire to really revisit it. Tantra, yes, I have.
I think there is really a spiritual aspect to the practices within Kama Sutra. That's what I've always read. So just a
I
different
don't know
opinion.
enough about it.
Well, I
But
think
in
that's
Buddhism, it's
why-
about actually transcendence of the sense world. It's using the sense world to transcend the sense world.
Right.
Because actually what's happening is that only 6 things are happening at every given moment. So it's a play of consciousness. So what you think of as senses is just a seeing at this point or a hearing at this point. And it's a fleeting moment that moves through us, but we tend to think of it as senses. And we tend to give it a permanence which it actually lacks, because it's a fluid movement all the time. So if the lens is pushed back and behind, it's a rolling movement. And therefore the world of senses is so fleeting that it's not necessarily celebrated. And it's also the world where we grasp. So to find that profound peace inside and the pure emptiness, you kind of have to leave the enchantment of all of that behind, because you're seeing the illusion of it, because all that's happening in every moment are the 5 or the 6 senses, nothing more. There's nothing permanent.
I'm reminded by this particular discussion of a World War II poet who wrote something called High Flight, which I highly recommend to anyone.
High flight?
High Flight, but he's describing his experiences of flying a craft to the point where there's a line that says, "And there I touched the face of God." So it's a combination of both being in a capsule of senses, but it transitioning you to the point where you connect with the spirit. And that's a parallel commentary to what I was trying to describe with the Tantric and Kama Sutra aspects, being something that directs you to the point where you can interact with spirit.
Transcendent.
Transcendence, yes, indeed.
I would say also, I think that's why the poses and so on are all over the temples, that it was considered sacred and transcendent, and a means of transcendence, as well as
And a shared one.
right.
It was intimately shared transcendence.
I'd like to also add that the transcendence as an experience is supposed to be an experience of love. And I don't think it's an accident that the euphemism for sex is making love. So,
I want to go back to what Bruce said a couple of minutes ago about when you begin to have these experiences, you don't talk about it because Bruce said nobody can hear you. it's not that they don't actually hear you, but they can't grasp what you're saying. And Jesus talked about the same thing, because his words were only for his disciples, for a small group of people who could actually understand and comprehend what he was talking about.
Sure.
I find that you can only talk to people who have had similar experiences. Like when you go into the deeper levels of the heart mind and stuff like that, it's undescribable. You can't even begin to talk about it at all, because as I said, people can't hear you because they haven't had a similar experience.
And we don't have the words for it.
Well, there are no words for it.
Yeah. It's the experience, but words don't do it.
No, words don't do it.
But I think good poetry, like I think some of Whitman's, he can point to it with words in a way that is unique, that can point you in the direction of it if you open yourself to the kind of strangeness of his language.
Yes. The Paul Schaefer talks about that in a paper called Culture and Spirituality, how music, poetry, beauty, architecture can take you there.
It's pointing toward it, it's not going to be the perfect summation, but it can kind of indicate it. It's a point of departure that just gets you to the point where you have to make that leap, like the two fingers not touching in the Sistine Chapel. That
And we have for it.
but I think to me it's a worthwhile endeavor, but it's difficult. But I'm glad that he tried, and it was a Western kind of mysticism rather than an Eastern kind of mysticism.
Right. It was American. And but you cut out though. You were saying something?
Basically the same thing that Marge just said. And there are bridges between the East and the West. There's a couple of mystics who really got into enculturalization. And the Apostle Paul was one of the early ones that I know about. When he was wandering around in the Agora in Athens, he saw that they had all of these gods. They had statues for all of these different gods, but they weren't sure that they knew all the gods. So they even had a god with no name. So when he gets invited to speak at the forum at the Areopagus, he compliments them on their religiosity. And then he says, I see you have all of these gods, and you even have one with no name. So let me tell you about him, the one God, the greatest sales job ever.
Sure. Oh, do you want to do this? This is your essay.
Okay. See if my eyes will work. I wrote this originally in 2002, and it was published by an academic publisher called Gale Research. And I was just going to include that in this, and then I decided to add to it because I said, well, that's not really what I think anymore. So my thoughts have changed in 20 years. I don't seem to have my reading glasses, so I'll just try and.
And you want me to read it?
Maybe that would be easier. Can you see?
Yeah, so we're
I'm
dealing
going to move this down here.
with this poet, Jory Graham. And the thing about Jory Graham's poetry is that this is work that cannot be understood or appreciated in isolation. Cannot be. So the some of the critics object to the need for any special preparation and their lobbying for the democracy of immediacy. But how many uninitiates can truly appreciate the Jackson Pollock painting without some introduction? To the casual or innocent eye, Pollock's work looks like the careless splatterings of a child or a madman. And indeed, these comparisons have been drawn. But with a little guidance, it becomes apparent that Pollock was attempting not at all to make pretty pictures, but to portray movement and time. Beyond that, he sought to challenge the whole conceptual framework of reality, to bend space and time. And with this perspective, his action paintings can be appreciated as delayed shutter portraits of his dance, more like capturing the motion of writing with a pen light in the dark than snapshots of a posed static scene. So with that, let's see, does this work? Why doesn't it want to do that? Here we go. So as poems and interviews of Graham attest, she's an enthusiastic fan of Pollock's work and shares similar aims of evoking process in her own work. Rather than the body's dance through the fields of space and time, she seeks to simulate and then to stimulate perception and thought isolation, to extend this motion, hold on, beyond the limits of language, the static poetic moment and the printed page into the reader's ongoing experience. She seeks in her poetry to create for herself and recreate for the readers moments of opening, of beginnings rather than endings. Her poems may not always succeed on these grounds, but they must be judged as collages rather than failed still life snapshots or the neatly wrapped up happy ending.
Okay, you're not getting it. You gotta do this.
Right.
They're moving collages.
Moving collages, my mea culpa. And the neatly wrapped up happy ending will always appear to be missing. The open-ended lack of resolution is deliberate, not accidental, and the suspended non-ending is intended to invite the reader's participation. So many of her detractors writing, for example, they question the viability of poetry as an instrument of philosophy. Or this critic is bewildered by the onward march of mind and spirit, searching for some arrival or some consummation, some end to all of this tending toward. But who is to say what's a suitable theme for poetic experience and expression? Only matters of the heart? Can the processes of the mind really be declared off limits? Surely the realm of experience to be explored is no less a matter of poetic license than the experiments in form. So some would have that hold on one sec. Have the immediately accessible realm of the senses and emotions with some kind of conclusive point constitutes the only appropriate terrain for the poetic impulse. How can one really reserve the poetic endeavor for such touchy-feely subjects as love, loss, and memory? It could even be said that the entire crux of the poetic moment lies in the collision between consciousness and reality, that is experience. So thoughts tend to follow their roots. Once established, as obediently as falling rocks yield to gravity's stake in things, the question arises, does the mind arise from thought and not the other way around? Can the mind exist without language? Is there mind without thinking? Descartes would have that being itself is dependent on thought, while spiritual teachers of the East and West would have it precisely the other around. Being begins when the thinking stops. Only when the continual chatter of the mind is silenced, they would maintain. Only when its relentless busy bee buzzing is stilled, can consciousness truly interact with reality. This is what's meant by pure mind. The pure mind is the intersection toward which Graham is ever striving, the intersection between not only reality and consciousness, but also between being and doing, between experience and expression. And Graham is continually striving to write from this place of clarity of pure being and to evoke those gem-like moments for the reader. So like Pollock's attempt to explode the boundaries of his canvas, Graham seeks to speak from silence, to arrive at a place beyond words by using language to delineate the contours and the ineffable. By the way, if you notice, the critic, really didn't say anything about the poetry. When you're a critic, you can attack them by just changing the ground rules and saying, "Oh, poetry shouldn't have anything to do with this." Well, why don't you talk about the poem? What's your problem? But that's how they play the game. The more one knows about poetry and spirituality, the more one will appreciate the risk Graham and her bold experiments in both her content and its necessary form.
It's just not gonna work. Sorry. Can you go back and move the picture out of the way? I'm sorry, you're just leaving out critical words.
Hold on. Graham's taken in her bold experiments in both her content and its necessary form, as well as her task and her achievement. So as to the appropriateness of her use of poetry for philosophical or spiritual purposes, one might even ask, what else? Are they not one and the same? The ambitious thoughts represented in mind are not so shabby, coming from the precocious mind of a 20-something-year-old poet in the late 1970s, a self-confessed hybrid of Whitman's lyricism on the one hand and Nietzsche's philosophy on the other. So Graham's early musings inscribe an arc with a promising trajectory of promise duly fulfilled in the ongoing experiments and mature work of this highly complex, philosophical and intellectual and beautifully musical poet of the postmodern mind. So anything else you want to add to what?
I think I had the poem there itself, didn't I? Could you keep going?
I don't think, now we just go into
Oh.
Kabbalah.
Okay.
I'm trying to think, is it on the,
I
it
think it's on
could
the
be, I think it's on the
resource
website. I think,
page. Yeah.
yeah,
of the
so,
resource pages. Well, it's kind of hard without the poem itself.
yeah.
I would have put that there.
Here we've got two different renderings of the tree of life from the Kabbalah. One is by Richard Stoddart, and it's on our webpage, and it's a very abstract rendering, but it has 10 horizontal lines here, and you can see this incredible energy flow top to bottom. And on the top right corner, we have the more traditional rendering of the tree of life. They simply didn't have the graphics that Richard had. So now as we go to Kabbalah, again, this is Western mysticism, but bordering on the East. It's a part of the Jewish tradition dealing with the essence of God, and whether it's tales of sacred text or an experience or the way things work, Kabbalists believe that God moves in mysterious ways. However, Kabbalists also believe true knowledge and understanding of that inner mysterious process is obtainable, and through that knowledge, the greatest intimacy with God can be obtained. The Zohar, which are a collection of written mystical commentaries on the Torah, is considered to be the underpinning of Kabbalah, and it was written in medieval Aramaic and medieval Hebrew. So the Zohar is intended to guide Kabbalists in their spiritual journey, helping them attain the greater levels of connectedness with God that they desire. You want to do this?
Okay. Kabbalistic thought often is considered Jewish mysticism. Its practitioners tend to view the creator and the creation as a continuum. I would say they tend to see it as it's one, rather than discrete entities, and they desire to experience intimacy with God. This desire is especially intense because the powerful mystical sense of kinship the Kabbalists believe exists between God and humanity. Within the soul of every individual is a hidden part of God that is waiting to be revealed. Even mystics who refuse to describe such a fusion of God and man so boldly still find the whole of creation suffused in divinity, breaking down distinctions between God and the universe. Thus, the Kabbalist Moses Cordovero writes, the essence of divinity is found in every single thing.
Hold on.
Nothing but it exists. It exists in each existent. The Zohar, a collection of written mystical commentaries on the Torah, is considered to be the underpinning of Kabbalah. We just did this, didn't we?
Yeah, this looks like a repeat.
Yeah. Within the soul of every individual is a hidden part of God that is waiting to be revealed. Even mystics who refuse to describe, we just did this too.
Right.
Okay, there are three dimensions to almost all forms of Jewish mysticism, which are likely to be understood by only small numbers of people who possess specialized knowledge or interest in the topic: the investigative, the experiential, and the practical. The investigative aspect of Kabbalah involves searching the hidden reality of the universe for secret knowledge about its origins and its organization. Can you move it out of the way, Bart?
Yeah, just trying to get the most there.
Okay. In Jewish tradition, there are three ways to be knowledge, this esoteric knowledge can be attained: by interpreting sacred texts to uncover nistar, or hidden meaning; by oral transmission of tradition from a Kabbalistic master; by direct revelation, which might include visitation by an angel or Elijah, spirit possession, or other super-rational experience. Although it is primarily interested in metaphysics, things beyond the physical universe, investigative Kabbalah is not anti-rational. All Jewish mystical esoteric traditions adopt the language of and expand upon the philosophic and even scientific ideas of their time. You want to read
Yeah,
that?
and then historians of Judaism identify many schools of Jewish esotericism over time. Hold on a sec. This thing doesn't want to work. Here we go. Each with its own unique interests and beliefs. And technically, the term Kabbalah applies only to the writings that emerged in medieval Spain and southern France, beginning in the 13th century. But beyond academia, the term Kabbalah is a catch-all for all forms of Jewish esotericism. Jewish mystics are not like the monks or hermits. Kabbalists tend to be part of social circles rather than lone seekers. And with few exceptions, such as the wandering mystic Abraham Abulafia, esoterically inclined Jews tend to congregate in mystical associations, and it's not unusual for a single master to bring forth a new and innovative mystical school, which yields multiple generations of a particular mystical practice. Until today, Kabbalah has been the practice of select Jewish circles. Most of what we know about it comes from the many literary works that have been recognized as mystical or esoteric. From these mystical works, scholars have identified hold on one sec. Many distinctive schools, including the Heckelot mystery. It just goes on and on. Hold on one sec. These schools can be categorized based on individual masters and their disciples. The mystical movements are indebted to the writings of earlier schools and on and on. So in contemporary Reform congregations, the observance of Kabbalat Shabbat, Havdalah, and the Tu Bishvat Seder derive from Kabbalistic traditions. And this identification paved the way for the exchange and melding of ideas between Judaism and Hermetism during the Hermetism
That's not correct.
during the Middle Ages. The most prominent interrelation is in the development of Kabbalah, which had three branches: a Jewish stream, a Christian stream, Kabbalah with a C and only one B in Christianity, and a Hermetic stream, a Kabbalah with a Q and one B in Hermeticism. Hermeticism, yeah. So medieval Hermeticism, aside from alchemy, is often seen as analogous to and heavily influenced by these Kabbalistic ideas. And Hermeticism and Kabbalah arose together in the 12th and 13th centuries. And this led to magic and astrology being mixed in with them, but focused more on the Hebrew language and its incantations rather than the general language of Hermeticism in general. So secondly, the Jewish scholars of the Middle Ages attempted to make use of treatises on astrology, medicine, and theurgy as justification for practicing natural magic, forbidden by a number of the commandments in the Torah and reinforced by prophetic books codified by rabbinic authorities. They noted the wonders of performing, the wonders performed by celebrated biblical figures such as the patriarchs and King Solomon, who were seen as God-given, and condoned use of natural magic. So, they attributed these arts to divine knowledge imparted by Jewish heroes to Gentiles, such as the Indians, Babylonians, Egyptians, and Greeks, and felt that by approaching magic from a religious standpoint, this would legitimize their use of the sciences. In particular, they believed the Hermetic teachings to have its origins in ancient Jewish sources. So these scholars, particularly the ones who distrusted Aristotle, looked to the Hermeticism as backing to discuss theological interpretation of the Torah and the Ten Commandments. Fabrizio Lelli writes, as for the Christians and Muslims, so likewise for Jews. Hold on one sec. Hermeticism was an alternative to Aristotelianism, the likeliest prospect, in fact, for integrating an alien system into their religion, because of this was because the response of the Hermetica to intellectual problems was generally theosophical. In the use of these Hermetical treatises, these Jewish scholars thought at times inadvertently introduced Hermetic ideas into Jewish thought. So in the 10th century commentary, the Hermetic influence shows, as well as in 13th century texts compiled into the Sefer HaZohar and in contemporary Kabbalistic works of Abraham Abulafia and other thinkers. So it was natural for these Jewish Kabbalists to elevate Hermetic teachings to a major role in Jewish thought in a time when they began to produce their own anti-rationalist exegesis of scripture. This was despite the fact that many Hebrew works were ascribed to Aristotle in the time through pseudepigraphy. These scholars saw that as a justification to give the same elevated authority to the medieval astronomical and magical Hermetic texts.
Well, they believed that the influence was only one way. that they influenced the Hermeticists and the Christian Kabbalists, and well, they did definitely influence the Christians, Kabbalists, but it was two-way. And they used to get together, you know, in the early days of the diaspora. The Jewish mystics would get together with the Muslim and the Greek and Christian mystics, and they would exchange ideas. They were often very similar, but they also definitely cross-pollinated. And as far as I know, it was only the Jews that wanted to say it was exclusively their influence on the others.
So despite Maimonides' denunciation of Hermeticism, Jewish scholars in the Renaissance struggled to reconcile his beliefs with those of the proponents of Hermetic thought within Judaism. And Renaissance scholars argued that the rationalism of Maimonides drew upon the Prisca Sapienta that had been both Mosaic and Hermetic origins. And Abraham bin Isra's commentary on the Pentateuch was evidence that they shared the same views on the relationship between religion and science. However, other scholars carried on Maimonides' crusade. One claimed that the theurgic practices of Hermeticism were against the teachings of the Torah, and others claimed that the Hermetic teachings were part of a primordial wisdom of the ancients and put the writings of Hermes as being equal to those of King Solomon. Hermeticism was also prominent in the works of many other people. So the works of Baruch Spinoza have also been ascribed a Hermetic element. Hermetic influenced thinkers such as Goethe have accepted Spinoza's version of God. So incredibly influential.
I discovered Spinoza. That was like my first inkling that I might be inclined this way. I totally loved him, and I was getting really tired of all the other philosophers that I was studying. This was in college at the New School. And I went back my second semester to one of my first semester teachers. And I said, well, I finally found a philosopher that I really like. He said, really, who's that? Great, you know, great, good for you. Because I was considered to be talented, but just not enjoying it, you know, and kind of at a loss. And I said, it's Spinoza. And he said, well, of course you like Spinoza. That's because Spinoza's a mystic and you're a mystic. And I just had no idea what to do with that at the time. I just was completely baffled by it. It took me many years to understand it. And it was true. That was what I liked about Spinoza. It made more sense to me than the quote unquote rationalism, which seemed kind of pseudo-rational to me. It really just seemed like they would set up their own terms and chase their tails in a circle and not really get anywhere.
So now we come to Tzimtzum, which is a term used in Lurianic Kabbalah to explain Isaac Luria's doctrine that God began the process of creation by contracting his infinite light in order to allow for conceptual space in which finite and seemingly independent realms could exist. So this primordial initial contraction formed a halal hapanu, or vacant space, into which new creative light could beam. It's denoted by general reference to the Tzimtzum. In Kabbalistic interpretation, Tzimtzum gives rise to the paradox of simultaneous divine presence and absence within the vacuum and resultant creation. Because the Tzimtzum results in the empty space in which spiritual and physical worlds and ultimately free will can exist, God is often referred to as Hamakom, or the place, the omnipresent, in rabbinic literature. He is the place of the world, but the world is not his place. Relatedly, Olam, the Hebrew for world or realm, is derived from the root meaning concealment. So this etymology is complementary with the concept of Tzimtzum in that the subsequent spiritual realms and the ultimate physical universe concealed to different degrees the infinite spiritual life force of creation. So one of the things that I have posted on the website is Ron Cohen had carried out a variety of observations on the what we would call the big bounce, or the contraction from a previous universe and then the expansion of the universe that we're in now. And it matches very closely these ideas here. But again, Ron has provided a bunch of pictures which you can look at on the website and come to your own conclusions.
I think we should talk about it.
We will, absolutely, in the section on cosmology.
So make a mental note.
Right. So the progressive diminutions of divine ore or light from realm to realm in creation are also referred to in the plural as secondary simtsunim, innumerable condensations, veilings, or constrictions of the life force. These subsequent concealments are found in earlier medieval Kabbalah. The new doctrine of Luria advanced the notion of the primordial withdrawal, or a radical leap, in order to reconcile a causal creative chain from the infinite with the finite existence. So prior to creation, there was only the infinite, or Ein Sof, filling all existence. And when it arose,
Which is nothingness.
yeah, it's when we talk about bounce, so we have the entire universe shrinking down, then that raises the question of, well, like, what's outside the universe then? which is a nonsensical question. So anyway, when it arose in God's will to create worlds and emanate the emanated, he contracted, in Hebrew, tzimtzum, himself in the point at the center, in the very center of his light, and he restricted that light, distancing it to the sides surrounding the central point so that there remained a void, a hollow, empty space away from the central point. Today, physicists might call this inflation, that there was a very rapid expansion from this bounce, and that the universe came out of that. So after this tzimtzum, he drew down from the Or Ein Sof a single straight line of light from his light surrounding the void, from above to below into the void, and it chained down the descending into that void. In the space of that void, he emanated, created, formed, and made all the worlds.
From himself,
Right.
but he or it had to withdraw himself from that oneness in order to have even a space, a vacated space to create himself into, because otherwise it's just this, huge blob of mayonnaise. It's just this amorphous oneness.
So tzimtzum contains a built-in paradox requiring God be simultaneously transcendent and immanent. On the one hand, if the infinite did not restrict itself, then nothing could exist. Everything would be overwhelmed by God's totality. So existence thus requires God's transcendence as above. On the other hand, God continuously maintains the existence of, and is thus not absent from, the created universe. So you end up with this paradox. The divine life force, which brings all creatures into existence, must constantly be present within them. Were this life force to forsake any created being for even one brief moment, it would revert to a state of utter nothingness as before the creation. Rabbi Nachman discusses this inherent paradox as follows. Only in the future will it be possible to understand the tzimtzum that brought the empty space into being, for we have to say of it two contradictory things. The empty space came about through the tzimtzum, where, as it were, he limited his godliness and contracted it from there. And it is as though in that place there is no godliness. The absolute truth is that godliness must nevertheless be present there, for certainly nothing can exist without his giving it life. And the most well-known, I think, of all of these Kabbalists was Rabbi Isaac Luria, who introduced these themes of Tzimtzum, Shevarat, Ha-Kelim, or the shattering of the vessels, Tikkun, or repair, and Partsufim. These four are a group of interrelated and continuing processes. Tzimtzum describes the first step in the process where God began the creation by throwing his own presence from an area, creating an area in which the creation could begin. Shevarat HaKelim describes how after the Tzimtzum, God created the vessels, the HaKelim, in the empty space, and how when God began to pour his light into the vessels, they were not strong enough to hold the power of God's light and shattered, Shevarat. The third step, Tikkun, is the process of gathering together and raising the sparks of God's light that were carried down with the shards of the shattered vessels. So since Tzimtzum is connected to the concept of exile, and Tikkun is connected to the need to repair the problems of the world of human existence, Luria unifies the cosmology of Kabbalah, the practice of Jewish ethics, and makes ethics and traditional Jewish religion observance the means by which God allows humans to complete and perfect the material world through living the precepts of a traditional Jewish life. Thus, in contrast to earlier medieval Kabbalah, this made the first creative act a concealment or divine exile rather than unfolding revelation. This dynamic crisis catharsis in the divine flow is repeated throughout the Lurianic scheme. And this is from Rabbi Isaac Luria. And there remained an empty space, an empty air, a vacuum, precisely from the middle point. And that restriction was equally around that empty point, so that the space was evenly circled around it. And after the restriction, when the vacant space remained empty, precisely in the middle of the light of Ein Sof, a place was formed where the emanations, creations, formations, and actions might reside. Then from the light of Ein Sof, a single line hung down from above, lowered into that space, and through that line, he emanated, created, formed, and made all the worlds. Prior to these four worlds, there was one light of Ein Sof, whose name is One, in wondrous hidden unity, and even the angels closest to him. There is no force and no attainment of Ein Sof.
That means without end. That's all. So everything was just this vast infinity.
And as there is no mind of a created that could attain him, for he has no place, no boundary, no name. And so we're going to come back to this, of course, for the Kabbalah and how it plays into modern physics, these notions of string theory and the underlying geometry that was there.
And you can see how Richard's painting was an attempt to evoke this idea of the light coming down
Right.
from the nothingness. But how do you depict something coming from nothing?
So with that, we're going to take a break here. We'll pick this up next time around. And a lot of mysticism here. Any questions or anything?
When just a comment, when I think this is funny because when I way back my introduction to physics in the early 70s, you know, they were talking about unified field theory of physics, and there's a musical group, education for young kids to get kids involved in music, called string theory. So I want to talk about the unified field theory of music.
Sure. Right. Okay. Good point.
a good name for a group.
Yeah. Okay.
I do have a question. A few minutes ago, when you were reading, went by a little too fast. I was looking for a little clarification. It was something to the effect that the way for the populace to achieve any kind of whatever was said, enlightenment, whatever word was used, was to live a proper Jewish life, or whatever, something akin to that. And I was just wondering, that seems like a convenient mechanism for controlling mass behavior. It doesn't strike me as a mechanism for achieving enlightenment. Is there something there that I missed?
Well, I would say that there are, if you kind of squint one eye and look at it a certain way, within a lot of Jewish traditions, there are, let's say, at least opportunities for a lot of presence of mind. Just like it occurred to me that the rules of kosher can help you be, it's, I think, important to be mindful of what you're eating. And they felt it was, I would say, like a waste of life force energy to have meat and dairy. It was redundant, it was wasteful at the same meal. And so to be aware of, where does this food come from? Is it just a donut from the store and just a bar of butter from the store? Or was there some life involved? Did some creature give up its life for this substance that you're eating? Where did it come from?
Margie, with all due respect, that strikes me as a contemporary attitude of mindfulness rather than a traditional, thousands-year-old attitude of behavior. My understanding is people, ate in a kosher manner because they believed that God told them to do it, and that if they disobeyed that, then there was whatever the Jewish equivalent of hell to pay would be, for not doing it. I don't think this mindful attitude was part of the equation. And I also find it quite a coincidence that the dietary laws then lend themselves to what we know now about things like don't eat pork. They might not have known about trichinosis, but they might have been smart enough to know that there was a correlation between eating pork and getting sick. So don't eat pork. And how do we get people to not eat pork so they don't get sick? Say that God said they shouldn't eat pork. I don't know whether that's being too cynical, but that's kind of how my thinking on the subject goes.
Right. It was just, some people say it was just a taboo for the sake of a taboo to set this group of people apart from everybody else, and it was just like not shaving your sideburns or something. It was a rule, like you're saying. But I don't think it was just coincidence. And I love, like, the Essenes said, don't eat anything with eyes to look back at you. When I've read that, it just jumped off the page at me. I just felt so affected by it. But I've always had vegetarian tendencies, since I was in nursery school. I thought the idea of eating animals was appalling. So maybe I spent a lot of past lives as a Hindu or a Nazi or something. I don't know. But my mother was always worried about me getting enough protein because I didn't want to be eating cows. And later I met some cows when I moved to Vermont. They're amazing animals. They really are.
Judith wants you to say something.
Right. Being a vegetarian, we all, we don't want to eat beef or pork or chickens because we look at it as an animal. And we think nothing of eating vegetarian when all of your plants have energy. And it's been proven that when you come to pick them, they actually get frightened because you're going to cut them. They're a life too, they're energy. We all are energy, and they pick up on that. But we don't look at plants as being, do I want to use the word alive?
Right. But I totally agree with you, Judith.
Yeah.
Right.
And they've done tests where a plant will even recognize if somebody menaces a plant and leaves the room and then comes back, the plant will recognize that person. They do, what are those electrodes, that measure the plant's
So they're kind of,
responses.
yeah.
Back to Stephen's question. I had a Jewish teacher in the public school here in New London in the 5th grade, and really an amazing teacher. I'm still learning lessons from him this many years later. But talking about pork, one of the reasons for that was trichinosis, I think it is, the worm that gets into the
Right.
pork. So if it wasn't thoroughly cooked, it was really dangerous. And I think a lot of the Jewish dietary laws were based on health and what was the food A, that was available, and B, how it was prepared and where.
Yeah.
Right, but I understand what Stephen is saying is that, well, is that just a convenient interpretation later? And it was just a prescription. It was just, it was also to reinforce that tribal identity as opposed to any other. And I think that's true.
Well, another aspect of tribal identity was circumcision, which was
Right.
not a very popular choice, but once again, it was a health issue. I'm not sure these things, whether it's a byproduct of that it becomes a tribal identity issue, but the main thrust of it seems to be a health-related issue, as opposed to the stated commandment of God.
Right.
Right.
Well, and most of Europe is not circumcised. And
Not Jewish.
right. And in America, it's so common because most of the doctors are Jewish.
Well, thank God for Peter, and allowing the Gentiles into the church, or Christianity wouldn't be nearly as popular as it is.
Right.
Apparently, he had a hard time getting people to agree to being circumcised.
I often don't know what's esoteric and what's mainstream Judaism. Is this, like acknowledged in mainstream Judaism? That one of the reasons for circumcision was also to give little boys a trauma in their lives that would be comparable to the trauma that women experience in giving birth. Because otherwise women are more mature, and seasoned than men, because they go through that experience, and menstruation, is usually or often very painful too. And men didn't have that experience and opportunity to learn discipline, self-discipline and all of that.
Somehow, I don't think it was much of a learning experience.
I want to go back to the magic and how that in the Kabbalah that they were misusing the magic, because it's that's happened many times over the ages, the Pope just doubled down on the use of the Latin Mass, especially for new priests, for young priests, not to use the Latin Mass. And they have a big thing about magic. And John Winthrop, the younger, was an alchemist, and he defended the witches. And finally, in the Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz, he talks about how thousands of years ago, the Toltec were known throughout southern Mexico as women and men of knowledge. Anthropologists have spoken of the Toltec as a nation or race, but in fact, Toltec were scientists and artists, formed a society to explore and conserve the spiritual knowledge and practice of the ancient ones. And evidently, they were misusing it, so it was hidden for thousands of years, and now it's coming, but it was preserved in a small group, and now it's coming back out into the open again. And Jesus talks about that too. So I think that is something that is worth pursuing in the future.
Yeah. Okay, let's wrap it up. We'll see everybody next week, and watch your emails.
To be
And
continued.
take a look at the website. And any comments you got, glad to get them. Okay.
I have another quick question for you, Bart. You be the one to answer this one. Last week we talked about, I forget the word, it's like numerology. It's with a G. What's it?
Gematria.
Gematria?
Gematria. I can't remember that name. I was reading a little bit about it, and it just struck me that that all you have to do is play around with creating some formula for any series of numbers, and you'll get the result that you want. It doesn't seem like there's anything that is seriously structured. That okay, you have formula 1, formula 2, formula 3, and you just make a new formula to get a result you're looking for.
Well, there are people that argue that Genesis, the book of Genesis, is in fact an encoded document, and they go through it and they pick up, oh, this section here describes how Kennedys are going to be assassinated, and so forth. So, you can make out of it what you want. I looked at the Genesis side of things, and I didn't find it particularly compelling, but that was me. So.
Well, the thing that got me, I used to always crack up in my Kabbalah class, was there's this thing, if the numbers aren't fitting the way you'd like them to with the meaning that you're looking for, you could just add 1 for the word itself. So that became a running refrain of mine that I would say in class. I said, well, if that doesn't work, just add 1. So yes.
Or the square root of -1.
Right. So I think there was some of that. But sometimes the synchronicity is just amazing and not convenient. Sometimes they had to deal with things that were kind of confronting. Oh, wow. Look who's here.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Unfortunately, you caught us just at the end. We're just wrapping up.
I figured. Is Mom still on though?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Oh, she did. She got to change her name. She figured out how to do it. How awesome.
No, I didn't do it.
No, I did it.
You could have fooled us.
How is everybody? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
New Year.
How are you? We heard you were sick and
Lots been going on. Yeah, and I start my intensive tomorrow. So I have about 3 weeks and I'll be done.